There's something that I really have been wanting to bring up, and it's a very fearsome topic for me. And that is the fact that while you and I and most of this country are involved in day-to-day shock and horror. I'm talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about risking being exposed. I'm talking about maybe not having the money for rent or mortgage payment. In some instances, even food. I'm worrying about the delay in getting the vaccine out. The economic meltdown, jobs, all kinds of things. I mean, we have so many things that have just been ripping and tearing and biting at us. 4 years of Trump and a year of this pandemic, a large percentage of which, where it concerns the death and the pain and the suffering and the destruction, is directly his. That's what that orange son of a bitch brought to us. But in the middle of all that, or behind all that, I should say, is the issue that keeps me up at nights. And that is the fact that we are involved right now in the initial stages. I don't know how to put it together, the sentence. Initial stages of the overthrow of the government of the United States. So my point is simply, we are at a place in the evolution of this country beyond which we're not going to go in terms of furthering democratic ideas where it concerns self-government, unless we fully understand what is happening and make it stop. Let me share with you something. In the March 1st issue of the New Yorker that I subscribe to, about an elite legal squad that was trying to safeguard the election of Joe Biden. It was written by Jane Mayer, who is one of the best investigative writers on earth, as far as I'm concerned. But in her piece, she mentions that last March, a year ago, the orange bastard said that the only way he could lose the election was if there was fraud. Remember that? If it was stolen from him. And when he said those filthy words, a guy named Seth Waxman all of a sudden was put on high alert. He couldn't sleep. He's a member of a tiny elite club of litigators who have served as solicitors general of the United States. Now, solicitors general are the ones that, as you know, represent the United States before the Supreme Court in lawsuits involving the United States, either as petitioner or defendant. It's the solicitor general, and he or she can have other attorneys working with them, of course. But the solicitor general is the one who coordinates for the U.S. government before the Supreme Court. Now, Sethman happens to be, just a little bit of background, an obsessive runner. And he often wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning, according to Miss Meyer, agitated by something or other. And typically, and I've done this before, he'll make himself a cup of tea and maybe sit in front of the computer for an hour or so, and then he goes back to bed. But he said that the insomnia that he dealt with last March, quote, was like 5 nights in a row, end quote. And the proximate cause of why he couldn't sleep is what he calls, quote, the doomsday scenarios, which he feared could unfold if the orange bastard tried to subvert the 2020 election. And the questions that Waxman came up with, there were a bunch, but one of the first ones, could Trump order the election postponed because of the pandemic? Could Trump bring up a reunion of the worst of the ICE agents, the immigration control enforcement agents, those ones that Trump sent to Portland last summer to intimidate minority voters who were demonstrating for equal justice under the law? You remember those son of a bitches. They showed up in military uniforms with no insignia and would snatch people off the street, put them in cars and take them away. What the fuck? I mean, that's like Putin. That's like Hitler. That's like Mao. I mean, just grab people. That's like Pinochet. Just grab people off the street, disappear them. So night after night, Waxman sat there and wrote down every possible thing that could go wrong with the election that was coming. And now this is a guy who has advised several Democratic presidential campaigns, so he was familiar with the pitfalls that present themselves, not to you and me because we're otherwise occupied, but the pitfalls when you have what is supposed to be a free and open election. But none of the nightmares conjured up by this orange bastard, quote, Waxman says, quote, corresponded with anything I'd worry about in earlier campaigns. End quote. So he wrote all this shit down because he knew who he was dealing with, the psychopathic bastard Donald Trump. And when he finished, he says he had a 3.5-page single-space list of potential catastrophes. So this was 11 months before the Senate impeachment trial exposed that unprecedented level of political savagery that Trump ordered unleashed by his psychotic followers. And Waxman was preparing for the worst. So what he did, he reached out to two other former solicitors general, Walter Dellinger and Donald Verrilli. Now, they served as the Clinton and Obama administration advocates before the Supreme Court, respectively. Dellinger for Clinton and Verrilli for Obama. So by last April, they'd formed a little, call it a small SWAT team to coordinate with the Biden campaign. And they called themselves, the Three Amigos. But the Biden campaign gave them a designation and referred to them as SG3, Solicitor General, three of them. And their goal was to safeguard the election. Let that sink in for a second. To safeguard the election. Bob Bauer, who is a legal advisor or was a legal advisor to the Biden campaign, said, quote, they were phenomenal. Our preoccupation was to do everything we could to address the potential threat the electoral system would just collapse. End quote. The electoral system would just collapse. That is the foundation of self-governance of any country, but especially here, the electoral system, where the people decide who their leaders are going to be. And the fear was that could collapse because of what the orange son of a rotten bitch Donald Trump was doing. So to describe this trio's special area of legal assistance, the Biden campaign avoided using Waxman's term, which was doomsday scenarios that he'd written out. The Biden team were in favor of the less apocalyptic term, unconventional challenges. Okay, I don't give a shit if you call it a can of whoop ass. What it was what it was. Doomsday scenarios in terms of how this democracy was going to react or the threat under which we found ourselves. Anyway, Waxman said of his under-the-radar little 3-person strike force, quote, it was an unreal experience. He said, quote, I kept shaking my head and asking, why, in a mature democracy like ours, am I even worrying about the president federalizing the National Guard to intimidate voters? And of course, the quick answer to that question was this republic. This mature democracy had never in its history had a pure, psychopathic, sick son of a bitch like Donald Trump at its helm. But Waxman knew that safeguarding the system would be an enormous legal undertaking requiring hundreds of lawyers in as many as 18 states, which was a hell of a lot more volunteers than his firm, his law firm, because he is in private practice, could provide. And which brings this up for me, and that is when you have a relatively small group as compared to the general population, which these these murderous son of a bitches in the militia movement, all of them, I don't give a fuck what they call themselves, but every single one of them is just a traitorous, rotten bastard. When you don't need a lot of them vis-a-vis the general population. Like I mentioned a second ago, as long as you have, call it cooperation, but a stand down of legal authorities who could bring a stop to it very quickly, as long as you have that legal authority stand down, why your gang of bastards can do just so much damage, if not completely overthrow the government. Take a look at what happened in Tsarist Russia. Now, I'm not justifying some of these governments who were overthrown, but take a look at the Weimar Republic in Germany, or Mao and the Long March, or Pinochet and what he did. As long as you have cooperation of the military, or cooperation in the sense they're not going to do anything, your small band of terrorists can bring down an entire government. I don't care how mature it is. So anyway, he coordinated with the Biden campaign's lawyers, and each of the so-called Three Amigos headed up a separate task force that they felt was necessary. Verrilli, the one who worked for Obama, he rounded up volunteer legal teams to address the ways in which Trump might try to use his executive power to disrupt the voting. And Dellinger, the one who worked for Obama, focused on what could go wrong after the electors cast their ballots in December. Well, what could go wrong? We saw an attempt to prevent the Senate from certifying that vote when they wanted to hang these terrorist son of a bitches. They wanted to murder Mike Pence. So Waxman handled everything else, including potentially rebellious state legislatures, which these Three Amigos considered the most likely threat. That the state legislatures, the ones run by these Republican Christian fascist devils, wouldn't certify the electoral votes for Biden, which would cause another total crisis, chaos, and breakdown. So by May of last year, Waxman had 20 legal teams on these rebellious state legislatures, what to do in case they said, no, fuck it, we're not going to certify. So Bauer, the one who was the legal advisor to the Biden campaign, Bauer said that these groups of lawyers, quote, produced thousands of pages of legal analysis and what he called template pleadings, and all this in preparation. All of this in preparation for every conceivable kind of breakdown in our system. And again, this is the problem in a democratic republic, or in a country where self-governance or the electoral system is key to everything. If you work within a system of laws, which these attorneys were trying to do, you have the disadvantage of all sorts of restrictions placed on you. When you step outside the law and become a terrorist, like these so-called militia thugs, the law means nothing. You make your law as you go along. Somebody in the way, shoot the motherfucker. Some office standing in your way, burn it. Somebody, private papers on the table, steal them. This is what is working on me. I mean, I have all sorts of my own personal life problems, just like you do. Got all kinds of shit that just bites at my consciousness 24/7, it seems like sometimes. Even in dreams. You know what I mean? But this issue, and I guess it's because, I love my country and the potential that we've always had because of our framing documents, the potential. And I understand what the United States is vis-a-vis the rest of the world in terms of self-governance. I get that. But also my personal interest. I've got children and grandchildren. And I have young friends. I have older friends who have children and grandchildren. And I don't want to see my 16-year-old daughter or my grandchildren grow up in a totalitarian system run by any type of fascist, whether they're Christian fascist, which is where this country would go, or social fascists, fascist types who are not all that concerned with religion. That's not the way this country is going to go. This country is so steeped in this phony bullshit Christian fascist religion that that's the way this country will go if our systems of self-governance ever collapse. I don't have any doubt about that whatsoever. So my interest is both personal, but also long-term, where when I won't even be here, obviously. But I don't want to see these gangs of filth, these scummy son of a bitches who operate outside the law, who have no respect for our electoral system because their fucking white skin and their fucking masculinity is somehow under threat because they are not strong enough as individuals to let that shit just disappear. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.